Why is there a suspiciously pagan-looking Roman figure buried in the wall of this nice Christian church? We're in the heart of the Wiltshire countryside, land that's been ploughed for at least 2,000 years. Tockenham is a pretty little village about 12 miles from Swindon, but it is on the flight path of RAF Lynham. The village church of St Giles was built about 600 years ago. In the wall is a small pagan Roman statue. Time Team are here to solve a riddle. There are no Roman remains in Tockenham, so where on earth has this come from? The team are already scattered around the site, while Victor, the team artist, is concentrating on the statue itself. Morning. Look, according to this little bat thing, which was in the church, typical piece of Church of England, isn't it? It says that this statue, outside the porch, embedded in the wall, is probably a Roman god that may be the oldest possession that any church in ancient Wiltshire has.
Pevsner is the thing I always go to first with these things.
What's that?
This is the book on the buildings of England. If you look up the bit on the church, it tells us, for example, that in the south wall, west of the porch, a Roman figure of Aesculapius.
From Homer, the doctor.
Greek god of health, something like that.
No, come on. He was the chap that Socrates raised his cup of hemlock to before he finally expired. A cock to Aesculapius. I remember that from my school days.
And this thing is presumably the sign of doctors, isn't it? The stick with the snake round it.
Oh, I'd like to hear an expert on that. I like the ice cream cone top right, though.
Oh, this thing up here.
We'll get an expert to come and look at it, actually.
Yeah,
We'll get Dr. Martin Hennig from Oxford to come down and look at it. But from the archaeological point of view, one of the things we have to think of is the church on an earlier pagan site, that was Christianised later on? Does this belong to some sort of temple complex or something like that? So we've started to work in the field next door. If you come over here and have a look, where we've got a spring, reconstructed modern pond actually, but there is a spring under it. In fact, there are lots of springs round here, and there's this association with springs and pagan sites and religious sites and all the rest of it. So we're going to be doing some coring out there. You see Phil with Mike and Julia there, and then see what we get out of that.
Same old patch, isn't it?
But because of the possibility there might be an early structure on the site as well, we've got the geophysics laid out here.
You always say geophysics or geophys, horrible word. What does it mean?
Well, in this case, we're going to be using resistance, a resistivity meter.
Oh, thanks, that's explained it.
This is a gadget with two prongs that you put in the ground, and it passes electric current between the two. If there's a wall in the ground, the current hits that and there's resistance. If there's a pit or a ditch, then the current goes straight through. So the machine measures how much resistance there is, and then all those information can be processed later on and give us a sort of underground picture of whether there are walls there or pits or whatever.
So the Romans might have built something on a site which was an earlier holy site
that as well.
With
that as well.
Springs and
things. And the Romans merely put their interpretation and applied their particular god to that particular spring or area or whatever. So it's a Romanisation of a prehistoric setup, and what we might have here, of course, is then the Christianisation of something pagan.
If this had been a sacred spring, then the locals would have chucked in offerings to the gods, and these may turn up in the cores. There could be 2,000 years of ritual history buried in the mud of the pond.
For the pond?
And it's got charcoal.
So maybe this place has been holy as long as there have been people around. This Christian church has incorporated the Roman icon into it, and Always there's this same idea, this spirit of place, this concept that there's something essentially spiritual here. It's different from anywhere else. And this chap, he'd have been in some shrine or temple here originally, wouldn't he? It'd be nice to see what that would have looked like. I'll go back to the incident room and see if I can find out. Meanwhile, Carenza has dug out the official sites and monuments record where she finds some very useful evidence. It sets her off in a new direction.
Tony, look, I was going off the SMR to see if there really was any Roman stuff around here. Look, you actually look in the record, we found something that is a Roman settlement probably in the village. Should be able to link this in with a statue some way. They would both have come from quite important sites.
I hadn't
It's great.
never seen you this excited. You're so laid back about anything.
This is really exciting to actually fit something in like this. This is, I'm sure there's nothing there. I can't see anything there. I can certainly see no Roman arches or anything, but go and see what the land surface is like. Is it grass? Is it ploughed? See if we can investigate, see if it's really, it could have just been dumped from somewhere, but I think this is great. I'm going to go and have a look. I'll see you later.
So maybe our attention will shift away from the church to a field on the outskirts of the village. It was there, according to the Sites and Monuments record, that Roman tiles and mosaic fragments had been discovered. Could our temple be in that field? And what might it have looked like? Right, what have you got to show me?
Well, Victor's been drawing some of the types of temple we could find. This is probably the simplest. Looks a bit like, a Blue Peter toilet roll holder. But
this is a rather interesting one from Hayling Island. And although it's a very basic little design, they probably tarted it up a bit.
Sure. And this is Lydney Park in Gloucestershire, where you've got a major colonnaded temple, but in association with it, a massive bath block and also substantial guest house accommodation for those coming to worship or coming basically to be healed.
Hello, you Mr. Barnes?
Carenza has called in David Barnes, the landowner, who found some Roman fragments while ploughing one
So
winter.
would you mind if we came and did some surveying across this field, try and find out more about the context that these finds might have come from?
Not at all. I'm actually thinking of ploughing the field up. It badly needs ploughing.
So would it be useful for you to know more about the site they came from before you plough it again?
If we're to avoid hitting anything, yes.
Right. Could you show me exactly where they actually came from?
About 50 yards out from the plant.
Okay then, what have you got?
Well, we got one of core in here, Mick, and we're going to try and get it out. Do you want
We've got the pond. You've got the pond.
Make sure the level doesn't start to drop. Yeah, and this is a fine silty deposit which was actually formed when this area here was underwater, under the pond.
Yeah.
What we can now do is describe this. We've actually only got about 40 or 50 centimetres of pond deposit, which the age of which we don't know.
Yeah.
But we can sample this now and actually try and see whether there are any plant remains in here, and we can sieve those out here in the field.
Oh, right. So you'll be able to tell us something about that later today, probably, will you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the aim, yes.
Seriously, you've got something else?
By now, Carenza is convinced there's something big worth investigating in David Barnes' field. She rushes back to find the geophys team. They've got to hurry up and finish working round the church.
We've got to tie this area up very quickly and get on to the next field.
I mean, it is such a large field.
Yeah.
It could be a good 2 days' work in there.
This is the Tockenham tithe map, 1866.
Original field names and boundaries might give us a clue as to what's buried in that field.
That date, and here's the field in which Carenza's interested, number 61, and also the field next door to it, where we're going to be doing some field walking.
I thought this was brown paper. It's actually old linen.
Oh, that's the real McCoy. But we can go one step further, back to 1764, to an absolutely magnificent estate map of the manor. And here's Carenza's field, Padmead, next to Knighton's Padmead.
Well, this is the one where they found the Roman bits.
That's right. And this is clearly a later boundary, you can see by its regularity.
So it could have meant that these two fields were one field originally.
That's right, immediately south of Widow Pinniger's Drong, which I think is absolutely superb.
I'd like to go there.
And finally, we've arranged for the digitising of the Ordnance Survey, the modern Ordnance Survey map of the area, and plotting all the information that people have formally come up with and what hopefully we're going to come up with this weekend, so that we can compile a master plan of everything in this immediate area round the church to hand on to future generations.
Finally, the geophys team gets started in Barnes Field.
Yeah. If we start from 100 metres from where they are,
Yeah.
just do 5 grids initially rather than go to the top end of the field, otherwise we're going to run out of time.
Right, okay, I'll let them know. Okay, I think if we try and get a right angle out on this baseline here.
Meanwhile, Martin Hennig from Oxford University turns up to take a look at our statue.
Aesculapius.
Oh gosh, I don't think it is Aesculapius. It's a genius, a local god.
Why can't it be Aesculapius then, Martin?
Because first of all, Aesculapius never carries the horn of plenty that we see there.
Right.
And Aesculapius always wears Greek dress and not a Roman toga like that.
What sort of temple would you imagine that this character might have come out of?
It could have come from any sort of temple, but it could also have come from a domestic site.
What, a house?
A house or a villa.
A Roman villa, in fact.
Yes.
Ah.
So maybe we're not looking for a religious site after all, we're just looking for some Roman soldier's gaff.
I think we better go away and think about the implications of that, and then we might be looking for a Roman villa instead of a temple, yeah.
Funny how things change on time, team. Whether villa or temple, there's certainly something in the field. The first geophys readings seem amazing.
It's going up to 10 nanotesla in places.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be a sort of cyclical trend almost, which could be the background.
We think that the ridge and furrow is running basically going across us here.
East-west?
Yeah, east-west. So we'll actually put our grid in that orientation.
Yes, I mean, it is a concern though. I mean, it's such a huge area.
Time's against us because we spent so long around the church. It's now obvious that this is where we should concentrate. So what exactly were the Roman objects found here that have got everyone so excited about the field? David Barnes and another local collector, Bill Giles, have brought in their finds.
So where did these come from?
The main site that you're investigating at the moment, other than that one roof tile with the nail hole which came from several fields away.
Well, this is all the classic indications, even down to the tesserae, these little squared up bits of stone and tile from some sort of mosaic floor, plus the heating flue tiles, all suggest a villa rather than an ordinary Roman building, although you've got the pottery and stuff with it. And then over here, Bill's brought in a number of the finds from the same site, Bill?
From the same site and the surrounding fields around the main site.
Right.
Yep.
Including a number of coins, Martin, which you...
They are coins of the house of Constantine, the first Christian emperor.
So this is 4th century.
These are 4th century.
Is this the right sort of context for our sculpture in the church then? If we've got finds indicating a villa as we talked about.
Well, my eye has just lighted on this piece of stone here, which is in fact a piece of sculpture. It's only Cotswold limestone, exactly the same material which our sculpture in the church is made, and it would suggest that is not the only carving that was to be found on this site.
So a Roman villa with statue in it, does that tell us it's a higher status building?
Very possibly does.
Plough soil then, and yes, there was a fair spread of...
All that stuff was first shown by Barnes to local archaeologist Bryn Walters.
And I've kept an interest in the site since, especially there has been some threat to it by continuation of modern agricultural activity. We're very worried about, obviously, deep ploughing these days.
Yes.
And there was at one time a threat for a new sewage system coming through this field. So we've kept an open watch on what might be happening here. There's a strong possibility on the evidence which we found laying on the surface of the field that we've got quite a substantial building across here, and who knows, we may very well be standing in the middle of a nice room here.
The sooner we get the geophysics results, the better.
That's what I'm looking forward to.
So are we all. Against fading light and the threat of rain, the geophys team pushes on to cover the field. They'll carry on working until nightfall, but for us, it's time to take stock.
Ridge and furrow,
Looks like a filthy grin.
Well, I was wondering, Bryn Walters is the local archaeologist who's looked at the stuff, and he thinks it's a really exciting site. He's really excited about it. We're looking forward to the geophysics results. I've been trying to get Chris to tell us results. He's looking really pleased with himself, but says things. But he's not really ready to give us a plot out at the moment.
We just had a session in the Institute room with bits and pieces that have been picked up from this field before, and I got very excited about this because if I found this collection of stuff on a piece of field work I was doing, I wouldn't have any hesitation. We've got hypercaust heating flue tiles of a central heating system. We've got roofing tiles. We've got bits of masonry and so on, and we've got wall plaster still with the paint on it. And that, to me, adds up to a Roman villa. You know, I would have no hesitation.
This is what Bryn's saying. He's sort of.
And you've still got nothing to say.
Well, you're all just going to have to wait.
That colour's a background to the statue.
Yeah.
It's
great. It's that crimson ready colour, you know.
End of day one, and everyone seems to be excited. Mick reckons we might have a villa, but we've got to wait until Chris is prepared to spill the beans before we know exactly what it is. Hope we'll know tomorrow. This is day 2. Apparently the results of the geophys have come through, so we're hurtling over to have a look at them. It's going to be a bit embarrassing, isn't it, telling the vicar that it's not Aesculapius in his church wall?
Oh, it's worse than that. Well, the church is now called St Giles, but it turns out that's a name that only goes back to the early 20th century, because he was a saint of healing. And right the way back to the 1200s, it was St John the Evangelist.
So they've got the name of the church wrong.
You could put it that right.
You can tell them that.
So this is the moment of truth, is it?
This is the magnetic result.
Oh, look at that.
Coming here.
Oh,
it's
Tony. Come and have a look at this, quick! You won't believe it.
Big next size up.
What about this then? You haven't.
You
haven't drawn those in with a felt tip pen.
No. These are 20 metre squares, so it's a massive complex. 100 metres across there.
80 or so the other
80
way.
or so.
And that's all foundations?
No, we think these are ditches. Whether they're robber ditches or whether they're actual enclosures associated with the villa.
Farmhouse all
all that noise is quite often structural.
All that noise is quite often structural. What does that mean? That's not English.
It's in my excitement line on it. Just know there's something happening in here.
So you're definitely saying villa now?
Well, with a little bit of knowledge.
There's the other one coming up.
We're now looking for the stone walls, the stone foundations.
Oh, that's an apse there.
Is that a tower?
That's just a villa plan.
What's an apse?
Curved bit at the end there.
Well, you keep saying it's very exciting and it's very mind-blowing. Why? I mean, there's an awful lot of Roman stuff lying around in southern Britain, isn't there?
Well, because it's completely unknown. There's no sign of it on the ground.
The geophysics is so
there aren't many villas around here.
This is the first villa found between Swindon and Chippenham.
So this bit, the bit where the actual villa is, where's this on the field?
I think we come. The key point is this peg here.
This one over here.
This one over here. Yeah, because we're standing right on the edge of the villa building itself, and the villa building's going that direction.
Sort of younger and fitter.
He's a jolly sight younger and fitter.
We're standing in here now. Okay.
It's a big place, isn't it?
It is a big
We'll
one.
get over there and they'll go hair off in the opposite direction.
Well, if we stand here, we can head him off.
Everything going that way.
Over in this direction too?
Going that way, we're talking about the villa complex. Is that okay?
Over here.
Took a fall over there.
How far does the geophys go then? It's the site of Wembley.
Here we are. Look here. We're on the orientation. We're now at this other extremity here.
Bloody
We're down here. Look at the flags. That's the orientation of the villa building as we've seen it here on this wing or whatever it is.
Well, that is fairly impressive, isn't it? And we're only at the beginning of day 2. Phil's missed all the excitement. He's been organising the villagers to do a field walk in the ploughed field across the road. The site looks so big, it's possible it might spread into the neighbouring land. So our field walkers will scour the surface for any evidence. Robin shows the geophys results to Victor, who's starting on an impression of what the thing might have looked like. But to be certain, we have to start digging the site itself. However, Carenza decides to throw a massive spanner in the works. She's telling us and county archaeologist Roy Canham that we shouldn't dig at all until we've got the OK from the highest authority, English Heritage, and that could take another day.
I don't think we should dig it until we've spoken to Amanda from English Heritage. That's just my reaction. It's not.
Why?
Because why should we?
It's a site of outstanding quality.
You know, it's an outstanding site. We're going to dig a little hole in it. It's not going to tell us. It's our voyeuristic desire to have a look at it is why we want to dig it.
That seems to me just sickening archaeological political correctness.
It's timing. It's timing.
We drain all the excitement and interest and passion out of it because, oh no, we don't want to dig up here.
You call this an uninteresting, non-passionate conversation, do you? I'd like to see an interesting, passionate conversation. Basically, it's a question of when do we make it. If this is a nationally important site, we should be making decisions at that sort of level. We are at a shorter time scale at the moment. We've got to make sure that we make decisions in the same way that we'd make decisions if we weren't tied to the present sort of timescale that we are determined by the programme.
So whose responsibility is it to make a decision about this? It seems to me that it's Roy's responsibility, but
I don't know where
Carenza's leaning on him.
I'm not trying to.
It's broader than mine. I mean, it's an ethical issue with archaeology as to whether intervention in the form of trenching should take place on a site of this apparent value. If it's going to happen, it's going to be under high professional control and minimum damage to the site, or zero damage.
Minimum interference.
Minimum interference. Absolutely microsurgery into the site.
The farmer, he wants to plough it and reseed it. It would be useful to say in one part of the site the stuff's only 6 inches down, 9 inches down, whatever. We've gone through the topsoil, not any archaeological material, but through the topsoil, and that's how deep it is. That might then affect whether he's allowed to reseed it because it's scheduled or wants to reseed it or whatever. The other point is we're basing this whole discussion on what the geophysics have produced for us, these fantastic plans, but the geophysics chaps themselves say that they would like to know what their actual anomalies mean in terms of what's in the ground. And it seems to me that at some carefully controlled exercise that went through the topsoil and stopped at the archaeology and which was open for Amanda to look at tomorrow would be a minimalist approach.
If we are going to trench, I think it should be away from the main complex of activity shown by the geophysics, because I wouldn't like to prod that at this moment. I really would like to keep away from
That's fine, because the geophysics chaps have already pointed to various anomalies on those long side boundaries that they said that would be a good place from their point of view to look at those, to see if they are ditches, as one thing they've suggested, or robbed out walls.
We've got this fabulous thing, and there's and we're not going to be able to investigate it. We're not going to be able to show it anyone. And then we got this compromise, and suddenly we're all mates again. I think I'm going to go and have a lie down.
It's very exciting. It's a serious responsibility.
Fair enough.
We're probing in the dark. We've got to thrash this out.
He's gone to have a lie down.
He's got to stop. He's cross.
At last, the diggers are allowed on site. It's only going to be one small trench, and in a corner of the site. With David Barnes' approval, we could get on with it.
OK then, Mark, we can start laying it out.
Start at the northwest corner, that's the grid point, and work round.
The digital map makers from the Royal Commission help us decide exactly where the trench should go. On their electronic map, we're now able to place it precisely across this bit, away from the main buildings. Over in the ploughed field next door, the villagers are turning up dozens of new finds.
Yeah, Chris.
Put that in.
See that sharp edge there? Put it in Mummy's bag. Do you think we should put it in?
Yeah.
Okay, then if in doubt, put it in the bag. That's what Phil said.
Yeah, that's quite
there's
a big chunk for that.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I had some like that.
And there's mortaria, look. That's what that is.
Well, this is great. I mean, this is Roman piece of pottery. It's exactly what we wanted, and it ties in perfectly with the site on the other side of the road. And no, it couldn't be better.
Oh, there it is. There's the level.
Now you're getting down.
By the time Phil has got across to our field, the trench is being carefully excavated until the first sign of some archaeology.
Certainly we're through topsoil, so I mean we're through modern ploughing.
We're only 8 inches down, and already we've hit our first piece of evidence. How about this for a piece of archaeology? The man who owns the field we're digging in, whose name's David Barnes, said to us, "Oh, by the way, I found this old stone fish at the bottom of a pond. Maybe you'd like to have a look at it." I think it's probably 18th century. So while the rest of them were digging, we sent Martin along, and you don't think it is 18th century at all, do you?
No, indeed. It's an absolutely splendid example of a Roman fountainhead in the form of a fish. It's a massive thing, and it's certainly the finest work of art of this type that I've seen from the whole of Roman Britain.
And it's really just a pipe, isn't it? An ornamental pipe.
Yes, it's just like the terribly heavy. It would have had water gushing through it at an enormous rate. It's the sort of thing that we know that was very popular in the late Roman period.
So if this was a big fountain, then does that imply that the building that we've got was actually a very big building of high status?
Oh, it has to be absolutely top-notch. This is not something from any ordinary villa. This is something that comes effectively from a palace.
We had a depth of...
By now, the results from the coring from the spring are ready. Could they prove that it had been used as a sacred site, and maybe that was the reason the Romans had come here?
Microscope in the field.
All right, this is the one you were really sort of hopeful then. That's just out of that one...
Out of that one small sample of soil, and from there it is absolutely full of charcoal and carbonised grain. And some of these black blobs here are cereal grains that have been processed.
How can you tell they've been processed?
There is no chaff, no other bits of straw or the ears, but also there are so much grain in this single sample, which is only so very small, that something very special or very odd is happening here, or they're using the pond as a dustbin.
Or a ritual shrine?
You tell me.
And it could be Roman?
It could easily be Roman.
Because hypercourse tiles had been found in the field, we know that our site had some form of heating. So how did Roman heating actually work?
The hot air, and inevitably the smoke, was funneled into and under the floor, and also, at a later stage, up through the flues in the walls, so that you got almost an all-round type of heating. It's a fascinating system. The idea that the Romans, 2,000 years ago, could invent central heating, and then the secret be lost for so many hundreds of years afterwards.
How you doing then? What have you got then?
We've got
pot.
Saxon pot.
Good.
It's beginning to look as though the Romans weren't the only people to farm at Tockenham.
We've got one of the Roman coins that we're looking at yesterday has got a hole pierced at the top. That's a sort of classic sort of thing in Saxon context. It could be late Roman, but it could be Saxon. Now we're starting to get pottery as well. I mean, we're starting to fill that gap.
Our thought crosses my mind, perhaps, that we ought to be doing the same sort of thing on the other side, if that's where the similar sort of anomalies come up, you know.
So little's coming out of the first trench, we're digging another. But that too turns up absolutely nothing. We still seem to be nibbling round the edges. From a grandstand view of the field, our site looks like this, with the main complex of buildings in the background. The first trench was dug here, while the second is going in 100 yards to the west at this spot. Yet we still don't have the full extent of the site, so the Geophys team decide to extend their survey into the next field. We know that some of the rooms in our building would have had mosaic floors. This is how they'd have been made. We're reproducing a classical design and even using some original tesserae found on our site.
So is this how they did it then, Martin? Putting these mosaics together?
This is one of the methods. It's what's called the indirect method. You lay it out on a table, gluing them into position, and then the thing can be taken to the site and turned over and laid into prepared cement.
But I mean, there were schools of these people. Is that not right?
Yes, indeed.
Different styles.
There was one school based on Cirencester itself, and this is a typical example of the Cirencester or Corinium guioche.
And we would be within that area here.
We'd be in that area.
But how would a villa owner or a major landowner go about getting one of these?
Probably have got somebody to come out and look, and what they would have brought with them were probably a series of sheets of patterns, what we call a pattern book.
Right. So it's almost like picking the wallpaper or the curtains for the house today. You sort of look through and say, oh, well, you know, I like that one, but what I'd really like is something like this in the middle, or my favourite god is so-and-so. Is that what you do?
Yes, exactly that.
Yeah.
Tony, so we got...
In the meantime, Victor's getting on with his drawing of what the buildings might have looked like.
We set about working out the buildings from the ground plan that we got from the geophysics boys. It's got a huge hall in the centre.
But that's only one theory. As usual, there's at least two others.
Looking at the expanse of evidence that we've already turned up,
yeah.
Both Martin and Bryn reckon that this is in the top 3 or 4 houses, villas, palaces that we've got anywhere in England.
What, in terms of size or plan or what?
Scale.
Scale, oh, right.
He reckons we're talking provincial governor.
Right.
End of day 2, and quite frankly, I don't know what the hell's going on. We know that there's a massive structure under here, and because of that fish, we know that it must have been of pretty high status, but is it a villa, or could it be the administrative centre for the whole of Roman southwest England? Well, we dug 2 ditches, and quite honestly, I don't know what Carenza was going on about, because we found virtually nothing in them at all. Phil says that they're embarrassing in their nakedness. But because there was no domestic refuse or anything in them, no sign of habitation, maybe, and this is the current hypothesis, it's a temple, and we're back to that original idea of this area as being a special holy place. Or maybe it's not that at all. I hope we get a clearer picture tomorrow. Keep your fingers crossed.
I wondered if you could just tell me a little bit about where we are and what progress you've made.
Well, following the...
Day 3, and Amanda Chadburn from English Heritage turns up. She'll decide how important this site is and whether it should be scheduled, which means legally protected.
To put 2 trenches in, one across here to look at what this feature is on this side, and that turns out to be a large ditch. And we also looked at this area here, which has got the same sort of signals as where the buildings are. And there we found, well, very little. But we were actually very concerned about what to do about the main range of buildings, because we may be digging a hole and going through a lot of stuff which we couldn't cope with. We thought we may be doing more harm than good. So we rather held off that until we could have a chat with you.
You see, because at the moment what you seem to have is the geophysical and not a lot of other information to kind of go with it. If there is to be a case made for preservation, it would help to know how the modern and the medieval ploughing had damaged, if it has, the remains underneath. I would be suggesting is that you peel off just the top and see what there is without going into it, without destroying it, but just seeing what kind of information there is underneath. I think another important thing would be to actually know what it is.
Yeah, well, we've sort of agonised about that as well. It's gone from everything from a temple through a governor's palace, right back to a Roman villa and all shades between.
Look, I don't want to terminate this prematurely, but we've only got the rest of today.
Yes, we ought to crack on.
Shouldn't somebody say that we're allowed to start digging?
Yeah, I think perhaps a 10 by 2 trench across the top here, perhaps where this major thing is.
Can I be the one who tells Carenza that we're allowed to dig a hole?
Yeah, I should take your tin hat with you, though, if you do.
A bit better, doesn't it? Hang on, what's that one there?
Oh, someone has painted
Oh wow,
plaster
painted plaster.
Our major concern is to discover how much damage has been done to the site from both the medieval and modern plough. This is a reconstruction of a mosaic destroyed by modern ploughing. Scheduling would protect our site from any further damage. Digging's continuing in the third trench, but time's against us, so everyone's brought in to lend a hand.
Really good.
Sorry, Phil. And this is an amazing survival, really, Tony, for this to actually not be disturbed by all the later ploughing. It's extraordinary that this little cluster has remained like that.
Am I allowed to pick it up, Phil?
Yeah, I guess
Go on, let's treat it. This has all been photographed and recorded, hasn't it, Phil? We're all clear on this.
No, I mean, I wouldn't straight
dislodge
in.
it very carefully,
Yeah.
Tony, in case it's got other stuff stuck to it,
It's coming away.
Yeah, okay, that's okay. Turn it up the other way. It's a little bowl, you see. That's the bottom of it. And
nice little piece.
that's good, isn't it? Yeah, sorry.
Just let nice little bowl, isn't it, eh?
I'm going to leave that last bit for you.
Some of these features here might be robber trenches.
What is a robber trench? I don't understand, because in that geophysics thing,
Yeah.
you kept referring to robber trenches, and they were straight, and then they turned a corner straight. Well, if I was a robber, I'd just dig little pits and look for the stuff.
No, it's not like that. Now, this is where people in the past knew there was stone that they could use for their buildings, and so once they'd found it in the ground, they would just follow it along, take out all the usable stone, put it in a cart, take it away with them. And that would leave a trench which is like a ghost of where the wall has been.
Oh, I see.
Right?
So in fact what you're calling robbers were...
Stone robbers, really.
Ecologically sound people who were recycling...
recycling the stone, that's
because
right.
presumably stone would have been a valuable commodity.
Yeah, well, I mean,
then.
why bother quarrying it when you can go and pinch what somebody else has got?
The question of scheduling is still in doubt. Amanda is studying 3D geophysical images of the site to help her decide. At the trench, the finds are beginning to throw light on the structure of our site.
I think you'll like those.
That's pretty fine. There's obviously very fine mosaic work.
While you're here, and have a look at that bit of glass. Think of that.
It's edge of a window pane, definitely.
Well,
so he might have looked out through that very window.
Well, a bit foggy, but the light would have shone on him anyway.
What do you expect? Double glazing? That's lovely. Come on, folks, then. Gosh, it's getting exciting.
As Phil presses on against the light to reach an outline of walls or the floor level, Carenza is putting together a picture of all the possible Roman roads in the area.
We do seem to have a network of roads centering on the site. We've got this track that comes out from the middle of the villa here, which lines up with this route right across the parish here and out beyond it. Mick and I went to look at a place where there's a local tradition that was a Roman road, which comes down here. It looks as if this is using the pre-existing line of trackways which line up with the Roman site. So you've got a sort of estate of arable fields and woodland all linked together by roads, with a major road that centres on the villa or the temple or whatever we might think it is.
And what we're getting
But what is it? Temple? Villa? We still don't know. By the afternoon, the first outlines of walls are beginning to appear at the bottom of trench number 3. This is Victor's reconstruction of how the walls are dissected by our trench. The interior might have had a mosaic floor, and the walls would probably have been painted this colour, Pompeii red. The exterior walls would have had glass in the windows. To come to a decision, Amanda Chadburn needs to see everything, including our starting point, the statue in the church. Meanwhile, Victor is recreating what the statue would have looked like 1500 years ago. The Romans would have painted it in bright colours, and if it had stood in the room dissected by our trench, it would have looked like this.
Whereabouts in the building would that probably have stood, Martin?
Well, it could have stood in a dining room, as you can see here, or it could have stood in the entrance hall of the building. It's after all the protective deity, the particularly local deity of the place.
And how did they use it in everyday life?
Well, very much as you see here. The man is bringing fruit and perhaps some wine.
So was it supposed to eat about the same time as the family sat down?
Yes, very probably.
Amanda Chadburn and Roy Canham make their way down to see the latest work on the trench. Soon we'll know if it's going to be legally protected. Meanwhile, the church seems like a good place to look for any recycled Roman masonry. You can see that most of the stonework that the church is made out of, these little roughly hewn clumps, because it's quite a low status church. There wasn't that much money to spend on it, but occasionally you get a big bit like that one up there that's really scraped by obviously much more sophisticated tools. That's a Roman piece of stone. And round here you've not only got these occasional big pieces of dressed stone, but you've also got bits of Roman tile stuck in. As we go further along, there's some Roman tile there. This mostly looks like medieval stuff. And look, you've got this one here and this one here, much bigger than anything around it. There's this little one in there. And here, this is fantastic. You've got a stone that starts here and goes all the way around to there. A massive thing, colossal, about this kind of size, which obviously must have come from our villa. And you can see that it's not flat like all the rest of the stones. It's got this channel built into it here and built into it there as well. Don't know what it's for, but it obviously wasn't created for here. Presumably it reflects its original use in Roman times.
Hi.
Hello.
Phil, hi. Can you tell us what's been going on recently?
Yeah, sure. Well, remember the first trench over there? That one was pretty much wound up. And then the other trench over there, we're just finishing there as well. And now we're back into this third trench, which is the one you got us set to this morning. And I think we're getting some results now. We've stripped off the plough soil. Remember you saw earlier on there was that group of pottery?
Yes.
Well, that appears to be in a linear feature.
Right.
Which is aligned through there.
Right.
We've now got another edge through there. Now, I'm wondering whether or not we've not got some sort of feature there, cut into natural subsoil, with the line of the wall running through there. I think we may have a back edge to it on here.
Right.
You can see here, this is particularly stony. I think that could be inside it, and then maybe running through there. So I think we've got something running through here, the wall line through here. And interestingly enough, it's also on the same parallel as this trench running through there.
Yes.
So I think now we might actually have both sides of the structure. So I think it's coming together. Yeah, I think it's coming together.
Well, we need some good, I think, a good clean up so that we can see the edges and everything.
Right.
You know, and that should really show.
Yeah,
well,
I mean we're pulling out all the stops now.
I know, I'm sure you are.
You know, we ain't got too much time.
You don't want to get too wet, either.
No.
But have we done enough in 3 days to satisfy English heritage?
Right.
Yes, that certainly looks all right. I'm quite happy.
And that's lining up with
Mick.
Okay, well, we're going to get it scheduled then?
Well, I mean, from what I've seen, it looks to be a pretty important complex of Roman buildings, whatever it finally turns out to be.
Yeah.
And the geophysics looks very impressive, and obviously this has been confirmed with the trench. So I think probably the answer is yes, although it may not necessarily be tomorrow. I think what we'll probably do is we've got this program called the Monuments Protection Program. We'll be taking all the Roman villas and the Roman temples within the next, say, 12 months and looking at them as a whole.
So this will go into the pot along with all the others, right?
Along with all the others and be considered with the others and being compared with the others. But it looks pretty good to me. I think there's a jolly good chance of it being scheduled.
Well, the archaeology's over, but there's still one more job to do.
Think, isn't it?
Here we are.
I shan't lay paving slabs for a living, that's for sure.
Not enough, Louise. That was hard work.
Over to you.
Time and a half.
This better be worth it. I'm sure it will.
This one.
Well, we've been out here all day. I don't know what you're complaining for.
Oh, very
Do you realise that the mosaic floors that we've found in the villa would probably originally have looked very much like this? Because this pattern here comes from somewhere near here.
Cirencester, up just a little to the north. And the corner pieces are modelled on examples from the school of Dorchester in Dorset to the southwest.
The words wouldn't have been in English, of course. But
No, but you got the Roman numerals for 1994.
It's true.
It's not bad.
So you can have this in your adventure
With our
playground.
compliments.
So what's Latin for time team, Robin?
Now that is the kind of question someone would ask, isn't it?
You mean you don't know?
Tempus Timus, isn't it?
Tempus Timus.
It's been an amazing 3 days at Tockenham. Time Team have located and mapped a major Roman site of national importance. The Jewel is this vast complex of buildings made up of 2 separate structures, and they are big, 150 feet across and 65 feet deep. On the left is a hall with a semicircular end called an apse. At the back is a tower, and next to it this large structure that looks like it could have been some kind of colossal banqueting hall. The whole thing stood in grounds surrounded by walls and ditches, but what is it? There are 2 distinct opinions. Either it's a very grand farming villa, or it's a ritual shrine and temple complex. But it'll take a lot more than 3 days to settle that question.